The gymnasium was thick with the scent of old leather and sweat, the kind of place where reputations were forged and egos shattered in equal measure. Outside, the California sun beat down on cracked pavement, but inside, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, a different kind of heat was building. A crowd had gathered, drawn by rumor and curiosity, forming a loose circle around the training mats where a slender man in black stood quietly, his hands relaxed at his sides, his posture deceptively casual. He had been invited to demonstrate his approach to martial arts, but not everyone in attendance had come with an open mind. Some had come to see a spectacle, others to confirm their skepticism, and a few, it seemed, had come simply to mock what they did not understand. What happened in the next few minutes would turn ridicule into reverent silence. And in that transformation, a lesson far deeper than any punch or kick would emerge. Before we continue, it is important to note that this account is a respectful dramatization inspired by Bruce Lee's documented philosophy, public demonstrations, and the spirit of encounters described by those who knew him, rather than a verified historical incident with exact dates and witnesses. The tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that seemed to coil around the spectators and tighten with every passing second. Bruce Lee stood in the center of the mat, his expression serene, almost meditative, while around him the murmurs grew louder. A group of men near the back, their arms folded across broad chests, exchanged knowing glances and smirks. They had seen martial artists before, men who talked a grand philosophy but crumbled under pressure, and they had decided, before even witnessing a single movement, that this would be no different. One of them, emboldened by the laughter of his companions, called out in a voice loud enough to carry across the room. The words were cutting, dismissive, questioning whether the man before them was a fighter or a dancer, whether his art was real or just elaborate theater for the gullible. Bruce Lee did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or harden his gaze. Instead, he simply turned toward the source of the mockery, his eyes calm and clear, and offered a slight nod, an acknowledgement that was neither confrontational nor submissive. It was the nod of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to show. The crowd, sensing something unusual in his composure, quieted just enough for his voice to carry, soft but resonant, as he invited anyone who doubted to step forward and experience his method firsthand. The challenge was issued not with bravado, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had tested his principles in the crucible of countless training sessions and real encounters. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, no one moved. The hecklers, so vocal seconds before, exchanged uncertain glances, their smirks faltering. Then, from the middle of the crowd, a man stepped forward. Larger and heavier than Bruce Lee by a considerable margin, his shoulders squared and his jaw set. He was not one of the loudest mockers, but he carried the skepticism of the group like a banner, and his willingness to step onto the mat was met with scattered cheers and encouraging shouts from his friends. Bruce Lee welcomed him with a gesture toward the mat, his manner courteous, almost gentle, as if inviting a guest into his home rather than preparing for a confrontation. The contrast between the two men was stark, and those watching could not help but wonder how this would unfold. Bruce Lee explained, in a voice that reached every corner of the gymnasium, that true martial art was not about size or spectacle, but about efficiency, directness, and the cultivation of oneself. He spoke of the principle of interception, of meeting force not with greater force but with intelligent redirection and economy of motion. His words were simple, devoid of mysticism or exaggeration, yet they carried the weight of lived experience. He mentioned that the art he practiced was not bound by rigid tradition, but was instead a process of constant refinement, of absorbing what was useful and discarding what was not, of making the art one's own. The skeptical volunteer listened with a mixture of curiosity and impatience, eager to see whether these words would translate into anything tangible. Bruce Lee asked the man to hold a thick striking pad against his chest, positioning him carefully, ensuring his stance was stable and his footing secure. The volunteer complied, bracing himself, his muscles tensing in anticipation of impact. The crowd leaned in, their earlier jeers replaced by an almost electric curiosity. Bruce Lee stood just inches away, his right fist chambered close to the volunteer's chest, his posture relaxed, his breathing even. He explained that this was the 1-inch punch, a demonstration of generating power not from a long wind-up, but from the coordinated engagement of the entire body, from the legs through the hips and into the fist, a principle rooted in the kinetic chain and centerline theory. The volunteer, still skeptical, nodded, certain that such a short distance could produce nothing more than a light tap. What happened next defied the expectations of everyone watching. Bruce Lee's fist snapped forward, traveling barely more than an inch, yet the impact was immediate and undeniable. The volunteer, a man of substantial weight and strength, was driven backward, his feet leaving the mat for a split second before he stumbled and caught himself several feet from where he had stood. The striking pad fell from his hands, and he stood there, eyes wide, breathing hard, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. He rubbed his chest, not in pain but in amazement, as if trying to reconcile the sensation with the impossibly short distance the punch had traveled. The gymnasium, so full of noise moments before, fell into a stunned silence, the kind of silence that follows a revelation. Bruce Lee moved without pause, inviting the same volunteer or another to engage in light sparring, emphasizing that the goal was not to hurt but to demonstrate principle. A second man, perhaps emboldened by the first or simply curious, stepped forward, this one younger and faster. With a background in boxing that showed in the way he held his hands and moved on his toes, Bruce Lee acknowledged his experience with a respectful nod and explained that what they would see was not a clash of styles, but a conversation of movement, an exploration of timing, distance, and the art of interception. He spoke of the concept of stop hitting, of striking the opponent's technique before it fully developed, and of the importance of non-telegraphic movement, of acting without betraying intent through unnecessary preparatory motion. The sparring began, and it was unlike anything the crowd had seen. The volunteer threw a jab, sharp and quick, but before it could fully extend, Bruce Lee's lead hand was there, a light tap that disrupted the line of attack and created an opening. He did not follow with a heavy counterstrike, but instead demonstrated the principle, withdrawing and allowing the volunteer to reset. The exchange repeated, each time with Bruce Lee intercepting, redirecting, or slipping with minimal movement. His footwork so precise that he seemed to glide rather than step. His movements were economical, each one serving a purpose. Nothing wasted, nothing exaggerated. The volunteer, though skilled, found himself unable to land a clean strike. His attacks met with interruptions that came faster than he could adjust. At one point, Bruce Lee demonstrated the principle of trapping, momentarily controlling the volunteer's lead hand with his own, creating a brief immobilization that would, in a real encounter, open pathways for decisive action. But rather than strike, he released and stepped back, explaining to the watching crowd that the goal of his art was not domination, but the cultivation of awareness, adaptability, and control. He spoke of the philosophy that guided his training, the idea that a martial artist must be like water, formless and adaptable, capable of flowing into any shape or situation without losing coherence. The volunteer, breathing harder now, nodded in respect, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Bruce Lee then invited the volunteer to push forward with full intent to commit to an attack without holding back, assuring him that no harm would come. The young man hesitated, then launched a combination. Jab, followed by cross, followed by a hooking punch, each thrown with genuine speed and power. Bruce Lee's response was almost invisible in its speed. He slipped the jab with a minute turn of his torso, redirected the cross with a light parry, and stepped inside the hook, his body now close to the volunteer's, his positioning such that the incoming strike lost all leverage. In that moment of proximity, rather than delivering a strike, Bruce Lee executed a gentle off-balancing technique, a subtle shift of weight and pressure that sent the volunteer stumbling sideways, his own momentum working against him until he found himself on one knee, unharmed but thoroughly controlled. The gymnasium was silent now, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any cheer. The hecklers at the back stood frozen, their earlier confidence evaporated, their expressions a mixture of awe and chagrin. The volunteer rose to his feet, his face flushed not with embarrassment, but with the excitement of having experienced something transformative. And he extended his hand to Bruce Lee, who took it warmly, a gesture of mutual respect that transcended the demonstration. The crowd, as if released from a spell, erupted not in the mocking laughter of before, but in genuine applause, the kind born of witnessing mastery and grace in equal measure. Bruce Lee raised a hand, quieting the applause, and took a moment to address the crowd once more. He spoke of the misconceptions surrounding martial arts, of the tendency to conflate flashy techniques with effectiveness, of the importance of substance over style. He explained that what they had witnessed was not magic or superhuman ability, but the result of disciplined training, of understanding the mechanics of movement, and of cultivating a mindset that valued learning and adaptation over rigid adherence to tradition. He emphasized that his approach, which he had come to call Jeet Kune Do, was not a fixed system but a philosophy, a way of thinking that encouraged each practitioner to find their own path, to question, to experiment, and to evolve. He spoke of the principle of directness, of taking the shortest path to the objective, whether in combat or in life, and of the importance of eliminating unnecessary motion and thought. He mentioned the centerline, the imaginary line running down the middle of the body that served as both a defensive shield and an offensive highway, and how controlling that line could determine the outcome of an encounter. His words were not delivered as a lecture, but as an invitation, a sharing of insights gained through years of sweat, failure, and relentless refinement. The crowd listened with rapt attention, their earlier skepticism replaced by a hunger to understand, to learn, to see the world through the lens of this philosophy. As Bruce Lee continued, he touched on the mental and spiritual dimensions of martial arts. The idea that true mastery was not about defeating others, but about conquering oneself, about overcoming fear, ego, and limitation. He spoke of humility, not as weakness, but as the recognition that there was always more to learn, always room for growth, and that the moment one believed they had arrived was the moment stagnation began. He emphasized that martial arts, at their core, were a vehicle for self-discovery, a means of exploring one's potential and pushing beyond perceived boundaries. His voice, though never raised, carried a conviction that resonated deeply with those present, many of whom had come expecting a show, and instead found themselves confronting their own assumptions and limitations. The volunteer, who had been off-balanced, approached Bruce Lee again, this time to ask questions to understand the principles behind what he had experienced. Bruce Lee answered patiently, demonstrating small details, adjusting the man's stance, guiding his hands to feel the proper alignment and weight distribution. Others from the crowd began to step forward, their curiosity overcoming their hesitation, and soon Bruce Lee was surrounded by a small group, all eager to learn, to ask, to touch the edge of something they had only glimpsed. The atmosphere in the gymnasium had transformed entirely, from one of mockery and skepticism to one of respect and genuine inquiry. In the days and weeks that followed, word of what had happened in that gymnasium spread, carried by those who had been present and embellished by those who had only heard. But for those who had stood in that circle, who had watched skepticism melt into silence and silence bloom into understanding, no embellishment was necessary. They had witnessed not just physical skill, but the embodiment of a philosophy, a living demonstration that true power lay not in brute force or intimidation, but in discipline, control, and the relentless pursuit of refinement. They had seen a man respond to mockery, not with anger or defensiveness, but with calm demonstration, allowing his art to speak for itself, and in doing so, he had turned adversaries into students and skeptics into believers. The lesson that day extended far beyond martial arts technique. It was a lesson about how we respond to doubt and criticism, about the power of quiet confidence and the strength found in remaining true to one's principles, even when challenged. Bruce Lee could have responded to the hecklers with harsh words or a show of force designed to humiliate, but instead, he chose to educate, to demonstrate, to invite participation. In that choice, he revealed a deeper understanding of what it means to be a master, not just of technique, but of oneself. He showed that true strength does not need to prove itself through aggression, that the most powerful response to doubt is not retaliation but the simple, undeniable. Also highlights the transformative power of direct experience. Many in the crowd had arrived with fixed opinions, their minds made up before they had seen anything. But when they witnessed the demonstrations, when they felt or saw the principles in action, their opinions shifted not because they were argued into submission, but because the evidence was undeniable. This speaks to the importance of remaining open to new information, of being willing to revise our beliefs when presented with compelling reasons to do so. It is easy to cling to what we think we know, but growth requires the humility to admit when we are wrong and the courage to embrace new understanding. Bruce Lee's philosophy of constant evolution, of absorbing what is useful and discarding what is not, is perhaps more relevant today than ever. In a world that often demands rigid adherence to one camp or another, his approach offers a middle way, one that values discernment and personal agency over blind loyalty. It encourages us to be active participants in our own development, to question traditions and conventions, not out of disrespect, but out of a desire to find what truly works. It asks us to be both students and teachers, always learning, always refining, always willing to share what we have discovered with others. The image of that silent gymnasium, the crowd that had come to mock standing in awe, is a powerful one. It reminds us that truth has a weight to it, a presence that cannot be icily dismissed. When we align ourselves with truth, when we cultivate genuine skill and understanding rather than hollow pretense, we develop a kind of authority that needs no external validation. We become, in Bruce Lee's words, like water, able to adapt and flow, but possessing an intrinsic power that is undeniable. This is the legacy he left, not just in martial arts, but in the broader realm of human potential and personal development. As we reflect on this account, it is worth considering our own lives and the places where we might apply these principles. Where are we rigid when we should be flexible? Where are we wasting energy on unnecessary motion or thought? Where are we allowing the opinions of others to shake our confidence rather than using their skepticism as motivation to demonstrate our truth? These are not easy questions, but they are essential ones if we are to move beyond mediocrity and toward mastery, whether in martial arts, in our careers, in our relationships, or in the art of living itself. Bruce Lee's legacy is not contained in any single technique or form. It lives in the hearts and minds of those who choose to approach life with the same curiosity, discipline, and relentless pursuit of excellence that he embodied. It lives in every person who, when faced with mockery or doubt, chooses to respond not with anger, but with demonstration, not with words, but with action, not with force, but with control. It lives in the understanding that true power is quiet, that true strength is supple, and that true mastery is a lifelong journey rather than a destination. If this story resonates with you, if you find yourself inspired by the principles it illustrates, consider how you might begin to embody them in your own life. Start small, with one area where you can apply greater focus and discipline. Question your assumptions, seek out new knowledge, and be willing to discard what no longer serves you. Most importantly, remember that the journey toward mastery is not about perfection, but about continuous improvement, about becoming a little better today than you were yesterday. Bruce Lee did not become a legend overnight. He became one through years of dedicated effort, of pushing beyond comfort, of refusing to settle for good enough when greatness was possible. In the end, the silence that fell over that gymnasium was not just a reaction to physical skill. It was the sound of minds opening, of egos deflating, of the recognition that they were in the presence of something rare and valuable. It was the silence of respect, earned not through intimidation, but through mastery, humility, and the generous sharing of knowledge. And it is a silence that echoes still, inviting each of us to step onto our own mat, to face our own doubts and challenges, and to discover what we are truly capable of when we commit ourselves fully to the path. If you found value in this reflection, consider sharing it with others who might benefit, and continue exploring the profound lessons that martial arts and the lives of its masters have to offer. The journey is long, but every step taken with intention brings us closer to our own version of that quiet, powerful mastery.